Phil Steele's Football Preview magazine has become a staple in the American college football scene. He's going to join us on the phone in this episode for a special interview with Phil. We'll ask him about his process. How do they pick the teams that go on the cover? How does he operate in a transfer portal world in a magazine? Wilner, you are a big collector of the Phil Steele magazine.
I'm a big fan. I've been a big fan of his magazine for decades, and I use it every day, just about, during the season because of the information that is relevant for the present, but also he has so much context available. And, I thought there's no better guy to help us get into the weeds of the season. And, we get into not the Pac-12 legacy schools, but also some details like the coaches who are on the hot seat: Lincoln Riley, Justin Wilcox, Brent Brennan, right? Is Utah going to bounce back? What does he think for the Pac-2? I mean, there's tons to get to, and I think he's the best person to ask about all of it.
Yeah, it used to be Bill James used to do the baseball abstract, and it became sort of the Bible of baseball as the data heads and the analytics people got into it. I think Phil has been in that space in college football in his own way, and we'll punch him up here. Joining us on the phone, you see him in the grocery store, you see him at your Barnes & Noble, or at least you see his work on the newsstand. Phil Steele and the college football magazine that has become a staple of the college football season. Jon Wilner, I'm going to let you cue this up because I think you are his number one customer.
Well, here's my 25 version, Phil. And I have got every Phil Steele magazine since I think going back to 2000. Big stack. And the thing about them, it's not just a collector's item. I actually go back and look at them partly because, Phil, you had the great foresight all those years ago to publish the point spreads for all the games, the following that had happened in previous years. So I can go back and figure out just how many times Utah has covered in the Holy War as a road favorite. And I am eternally grateful for that kind of information, Phil.
I appreciate that, John. And John, I think once or twice you've tweeted out a picture of your stack.
Yes.
I greatly appreciate that. It's we put a lot of work in the magazine. I spend 7 months each year putting this thing together, me and my entire staff. And to know that someone like yourself reads it that thoroughly makes it all worthwhile.
Hey, Phil, help us out. Like, what's your garage look like? I mean, because do you have like back issues and boxes, and where do you store all this stuff?
Yeah, we actually have them at the warehouse here at work. And so we've got a huge warehouse, and we've got all the magazines back since 1995. Now, naturally, I think 1995, I might have 125 magazines left, if that. And then naturally, the more recent years, we've got more magazines left. But we've got magazines dating back all the way to 1995 in the warehouse.
Could you just walk us through? I'm very curious. The chronology of how you put the magazine together, because it's ready by July, and it's 350 pages, and it's so dense with information I can't even describe it for people who don't read it. But how does it go? How do you go about putting it together from January through July?
Yeah, actually, John, I start the Sunday after Thanksgiving on this thing every year. That's when some team seasons are complete. And we have we gather articles all during the year from every article is written about the teams during the year. So I do it in a 3 write-through process. So the first write-through, go back and read through every article that was written about the team for the season. It gives me a real good ebb and flow of each position. And then I write each position with 3 thoughts in mind. Number 1, what kind of shape were they heading into last year? What happened last year? What kind of shape are they heading into this year? Now, 2/3 of that's not going to change, the last year part. But that last third in this era of the transfer portal is going to be rewritten probably 5-6 times by the time 7 months rolls by. So anyway, that's my first write-through process. I set up my power ratings. The second write-through is once spring practice starts, we get the rosters. I now update the freshmen coming in, transfers coming in, rewrite that last third. And then the third write through is after I talk to the head coaches. And I try to talk to all 136 head coaches. A lot of times logistics don't let me get to all 136. But I think I got to 126 this year going through the rosters. And what I send them my pages with all my notes on every player, have all my players in order. And I say, look, coach, put me in order and tell me a little bit something about each position. The calls generally last about an hour. And then I do my third write-through process, which is, finalizing each position and then my total right through for the team. And that's why it is literally a 7-month process. And I tell you what, that last month with this second transfer portal, now the portal didn't close till the end of April, trying to cram all those head coaches into the month of May was nearly impossible this year. It actually dragged into the month of June a little bit.
The coaches that I talk with on my radio show have changed the way they talk about players, in that I think they're afraid to say something publicly that would cause a kid to get into the portal, or maybe to even talk about a position group. Sometimes they'll say, well, the room is great. They're reluctant to single out a player. How has the portal and maybe the 2 windows and maybe that framing changed in your mind as you have those conversations with coaches?
Yeah, the conversations seem pretty much like they were. The coaches will off the record say, sometimes, well, all my calls are off the record for the most part. I mean, I rarely quote the coaches. I don't. I have notes on players. I don't put those notes necessarily in the magazine. So I think they feel pretty safe with what they tell me. I know the things they don't want to get out, and I know the things they do want to get out. And I'm not looking for clicks or anything on the internet. I'm just trying to put together a magazine and put out have the players in the right positions on the right teams. But the coaches will say, hey, if this kid plays up to the level, he won't be here next year. Or they'll say, hey, if he didn't get injured last year, we wouldn't have him this year, which is pretty vital. I tell you what, all the coaches I talk to, and myself especially, want one transfer portal. I can't tell you the amount of players going through these pages that signed with a team in the winter and left after spring was over. I mean, remember when you used to have to sit out a year? Now you don't even have to play for the team. You just sign, take your money, play in the spring, and then leave. It's getting silly. Hopefully we go to one transfer portal. What have you guys heard on that?
Well, I think that, they all want to go to one transfer portal. It's just a matter of when. The Big Ten wants it to be late. The other conferences want it to be in January. We'll see if they can agree.
Yeah, let's go for January. I'm all for that. Because that would be after the bowls. We wouldn't have the situation with, like Penn State's quarterback sitting out the bowl game or transferring prior to it. But, here's something that I found it fascinating talking to the coaches this year. There's actually stuff going on during the damn season where they are tampering with players on teams. And so now you get to the end of the season and you're seeing teams going into the tank. A lot of times it's because those players are probably talking about the transfer portal already and trying to line up where they're going to be next year.
Phil, how do you assess the transfers as, returning starters, equating what they have done at the previous school with what they might do and how that impacts your projections for each team?
Yeah. Now, as far as the returning starters in the magazine, and I'm going to add something to it next year. I used to have, well, if you lose 5 starters, you have 6 back. You can't have 8 starters back if you lose 5. So I had that would be the old way prior to the transfer portal. I would get my 11, and that would be it. It would be either lost or there. Now what I have to do is you take a look at your returning starters, and then you got the new guys coming in. Now, if they started for another team and they won the starting job in the spring, then I'll count them as a returning starter. If they didn't win the starting job in the spring, then I don't count them as a returning starter, because you'd be surprised how many of these transfers come in and then you're like, oh, he didn't even really play last year. So a lot of them don't have the impact. So as long as they won the job in the spring, I count them. Now, what I'm going to do next year, and John, you can flip through the magazine, you'll notice it, is like on the offense, for example, it'll have 6/3. And what that means is going to mean is they've got 6 returning starters, 3 of them were with this team last year. And I think that'll be a pretty good way to keep track of it. The thing I've looked at this year is my homegrown factor. I think the teams that don't utilize the portal as as much are going to have some real good success this season. You take a look at even Ohio State last year. Ohio State had some transfers, some big name transfers, but the majority of their roster were homegrown. They were guys that came in as freshmen, developed as seniors. And I think you find the teams that are more stable like that, not relying on 60, 70 new players every year, are going to have a lot of, like, look, Clemson won the ACC. Iowa State was in the Big 12 title game. Army and Navy had exceptional years last year, and they don't have any transfer portal people. And, there are teams that have to, like Group of Five. For example, I'm talking to Tim Beck of Coastal Carolina, and I open up the conversation with this. I go, Coach, it's year 3. Now, last year you had 68 new players. Things are settling down for you, right? He's like, Phil, this year I got 69 new players. So it's the way it is in the Group of Five. They're just going to lose players once they become good. And I just think the teams with less churn, for example, in the Sun Belt, Louisiana, has very little transfer portal usage. Coach Desormeaux is relying on freshmen. They only landed 7 people in the portal this year, and it's mostly a homegrown team. I think you're going to see Louisiana have good success in the Sun Belt.
The cover of the magazine is interesting to me, and we'll see magazines that zone to a particular area. So if you're living in Tallahassee, then some magazines will give you Florida State on the cover. How do you decide what goes on the cover? How much zoning goes on with your magazine, if at all?
Yeah, we actually do have 6 different covers this year. We went with a West Coast cover, which has like Oregon and USC and Arizona State, BYU. And then we've got the Texas Midlands cover. We have a Southeast cover. I have a East Coast cover, which includes Florida, a Midwest cover, and then the national cover. Now, the national cover, I could tell you how it's decided. I basically go with my top 5 teams. So sometimes, they're saying, hey, we need the cover guys. I'm like, well, I've got 3 of the 5, but I don't know what my top 5 teams are yet. This is still 3 weeks where the magazine's going to the press. And then the other covers are based on, hey, I think this team's going to have success, or, hey, this is a big-time star player. Let's get him on the cover. And that's how we determine it.
Well, and there's no players from West Coast teams on your national cover this year, suggesting that you don't have Oregon or anyone else in your top 5. What do you think of the former Pac-12 schools?
Oh, I think they're all real good this year. I mean, you take a look at Oregon, for example. I think there's 3 teams that make the playoffs in the Big Ten this year. Oregon's one of those 3. I think there's 4 that's going to make the playoffs, but there's 3 definites. Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon. And when you look at Oregon, I think Dan Lanning's doing a tremendous job there of bringing in talent. I mean, they lost a lot from last year's squad, including their quarterback, Dylan Gabriel. But I think Dante Moore is going to be much better than he looked like at UCLA for 2 reasons. He's been in the system now for 2 years. He's not a true freshman. He's got a better supporting cast. Look at those offensive linemen Lanning brought in. I mean, Matthew Bedford coming in from Indiana, Pregnon from USC, Alex Harvey coming in from Nevada or Texas State, and Isaiah World coming in from Nevada. These guys are all conference type players. They're going to have a good offensive line. They've got the receiving core. I like DeCorian and Moore. And then defensively, there's plenty of talent there. So I think Lanning's doing a good job. And when you look at the schedule this year, I have an underdog in 1 game. That's at Penn State. So I think Oregon's a legitimate contender in the Big Ten this year and should have a good year. When you look at USC, for example, USC is a team that last year at one point could have been 11-0. But they were 6-5. I mean, you look at all those close games they had. The Michigan game, Mullins breaks off that 40-yard run, and then they go score on 4th and goal at the end of the game to slip by them. They led Penn State start to finish last year, basically. Lost that thing in overtime. The Maryland game, they're kicking a field goal to go up by 9. It gets blocked, returned to midfield. They score a touchdown on them. There's plenty of things that happened to USC last year. In fact, when I talked to Coach Riley, I'm like, you guys were so close to having a really good season. So watch out for USC. They're probably an under the radar team. And then with a team like Washington, for example, Washington last year, you talk about Jed Fish taking over a tough situation. It's funny. Last year when we contacted Washington and said, hey, send us some pictures for Washington, for the magazine of last year's players in action. They're like, well, Phil, we don't have any left. And it wasn't really an understatement. They hadn't anybody left from the previous year, and I thought Jed Fish did a really good job just getting that team to a bowl game last year, even coming off a national championship. He's in so much better shape this year with Damon Williams at QB, Jonah Coleman back at running back, Denzel Boston a wide receiver, a vastly improved defense. It's a much more veteran group. It's year 2. They're tough at home. Watch out, Ohio State on September 27th. Washington's a tough place to play. Illinois has to travel there. Oregon has to travel there. If they stay tough at home like they were last year, they could really be a surprise team.
I'm going to go to the Big 12 and maybe have you look at a couple of former Pac-12 schools there. One is Utah, who I thought would win the Big 12 last year, and everything unraveled with their injuries and Cam Rising. And then the other is Arizona State, who was a surprise. How do you see those two schools this year?
Yeah, I'm really bullish on Utah. I was last year, just like you, John. I liked them. And then, the Cam Rising situation on a weekly basis. Will he play? Won't he play? Then he came back mid-year, and boy, did he wasn't good that game. And then at the end of the year, they're starting a 5th-string quarterback the final 2 games of the season. Nothing was wrong with the defense. And when I talked to Coach Whittingham this year, he said this is the best offensive line he's had in 21 years. Now, if you take a look at the job that offensive coordinator Jason Beck and quarterback Devin Dampier did at New Mexico last year, I mean, if you took the individual pieces they had, they come nowhere near what they did statistically. They were amazing. Now Dampier steps into an offense where he's got much better surrounding talent. You look at the running back situation with Parker and Rogers. There's no question Utah will have an outstanding defense. Not was wrong with their defense last year. They always have a great defense. That's not even a question. I think their special teams are upgraded. It's a veteran squad. They're tough to beat at home, and home is the key factor. For me, when I looked at the Big 12 this year, I thought there were 7 teams that could win the Big 12. You got Baylor, Utah, Iowa State, Arizona State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, TCU. Throw them all in the hat, right? Well, I came out with who's got the best schedule. And if you look at Utah's schedule, on the road, they're playing West Virginia. They're playing Kansas, Baylor, and BYU. They do play one of those 7 teams. Meanwhile, let's go to Arizona State. By the way, I have Utah as one of the favorites in the Big 12. Now let's go to Arizona State. I think what Dillingham did with them last year is phenomenal. Their big question, of course, is who the heck is going to replace Cam Scadaboo, I should say. And, they've got Sam Leavitt back. They've got Udo coming in from Army, which is a great pickup. Jordan Tyson missed the end of the season last year. He's back. You could say this is a better team at Arizona State this year than they were last year if Udo produces a running back. Now, to me, their question mark is the schedule. I mentioned all those big teams, right? Well, they have to play Baylor on the road, Utah on the road, Iowa State on the road. Those are 3 really tough road games. Remember last year, Georgia came into the season number 1 in the country, but they had their 3 toughest opponents were Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas, and they had to play them all on the road, and they lost 2 of them. That just happens when you go on the road in college football sometimes. Well, this year, Georgia gets all 3 of them at home. That's why I've got them picked to win the SEC. Same thing with Arizona State. I think those 3 tough road games kept me from calling them at the very top.
Do you factor in the injuries and the tendency for there to be a reversion of the mean? Like I'm thinking about Utah, for instance, and how battered they were last year. What is your experience with injury, teams that get hit really hard? Do they typically have a healthier year the next season?
You read my mind there, John. Yes. And it's one of these years I'm going to put in an article in the magazine. I usually do a blog on it on philsteele.com. But yes, that's exactly what happens. Teams that are all of a sudden you got 74 starts lost to injury, or you'll see on the reverse side, let's say the team had 0 starts lost to injury or 1 start lost to injury last year. You think that's going to happen again next year? And yes, I've plugged all that in the computer. Generally, the teams that lose a lot of starters one year have a better record the next year. Let's look at Iowa State's defense, for example. Last year, going over the team with Coach Campbell, he was like, Phil, we were missing a bunch of starters on defense. And when we go player by player, I'm like, damn, that's another guy that was out. Oh, damn, that's another starter that was out. They were all banged up in the second half of last year. And you go back to their games, you wonder why they got beat by Texas Tech and Kansas. Their defense was really hit hard by injuries. Look how they looked in the opening game against Kansas State. They look really good. They've got the majority of those players. And when you have injured players, two things happen, John. Number one, you get that injured player back. But secondly, their backups gain experience. So now you've got unusual experience coming back in the backup spot to go along with those injured players. Look at Clemson's wide receiver unit, for example, 2 years ago. They lost their top 3 receivers by week 2. And Cade Klubnik had 19 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Last year, those injured players were back. Plus, they added 2 super freshmen. Cade Klubnik had 36 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. There's a difference. And I think the experience gained by the backups, the fact you get the injured guy back, all those are big pluses for teams. So great point there, John.
The Pac-12 pieced together a schedule this year with Oregon State. It's such a weird schedule, with really front-loaded, and then they've got 7 or 8 games down the stretch that they could just, I think, clean up. But what do you make of Oregon State's season and Washington State with Jimmy Rogers in year 1?
Well, Oregon State, I'm pretty bullish on the Beavers this year. And you go back to last year, they got hit hard. They lost their head coach. They lost a ton of players. They had 1 returning starter on defense, 4 on offense. And, Coach Bray came into the season with the emphasis, we're going to make the playoff. And I thought that was a little dangerous. And you look at how they started the season. They started great. They were 4-1. Their only loss was to Oregon. Yeah, they had a shot at the playoff. But then things started to go south. And all of a sudden, the last part of the season didn't go well. And they finished 5-7. I think this year, bringing in Malik Murphy, a quarterback, is a nice pickup there. Anthony Hankerson had a really good year last year, rushing for 1,000 yards. He's back. Overall, it's a much more experienced team overall. I think the schedule is very manageable. I rated number 117 in the country. I think they can get off to a good start. They will be a dog at Texas Tech and at Oregon. The App State game is a concern because you're traveling all the way across the country. That's got altitude as well. It's a tough place to play. Other than that, I think all their games are winnable. So I think Oregon State definitely gets to bowl eligibility this year and could have a surprisingly good year. Now, with Washington State, they were 8-5 last year, but they had some close wins. And this year, they lose a lot. They lose their head coach. They lose a lot to the transfer portal. Jimmy Rogers, I like the fact he brought in a lot of South Dakota State transfers, I should say, because that's what Cignetti did last year at James Madison. But I just think it's probably a down year for Washington State in the fact that they've had so many transfers come in on the team. They're number 125 on my experience chart, and they have a fairly tough schedule. I've got them an underdog at North Texas, home to Washington, at Mississippi, at Virginia, at Oregon State, at James Madison. That's 6 right there. I've got them a dog, and I've got some toss-up games on the schedule. If they get to a bowl game in Jimmy Rogers' first year, I think he'll do a good job.
When you talk to the coaches, that aren't in the Power 4 conferences, do they have any hope that, given the way the sport is moving and the dynamics of the revenue sharing and, who's got the resources for NIL? Like, I'm just thinking not only Oregon State, Washington State, but, Boise or Memphis or even Army, Navy, right? Do you see a way that they can remain competitive with the top 4?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. There's the one advantage they get, and it's probably a short-term advantage, is that they're getting a better class of freshmen with the Power 4 schools that are bringing in transfers. They're able to, some of the freshmen are dropping down, and they're landing at the group of 5 places where they wouldn't normally have been a P4 guy prior, just because there's less freshman scholarships available. But they realize once they develop the player and it becomes all conference, he's gone. They understand that completely. And it's tough. It's tough to be a group of 5 coach. Maybe they'll catch lightning in a bottle. Maybe they'll stay healthy during a playoff run. If one of them gets in there and remember Notre Dame last year when they played Ohio State in the season final in the national championship game, they were down their top defensive lineman, their top offensive lineman, Jeremiah Love. Their star running back had 2 carries in the game. So they were a depleted team into it. And you go to the FCS playoffs, there was a 3-year stretch in the FCS playoffs where the 3rd place finisher in a division in the Colonial Conference was playing for the national championship because they remained healthy during the playoffs where all the other teams got beat up. So I can paint that scenario and say, yeah, there's a chance for them to get there, but it would take a lot of factors going in their favor. And they are resigned to the fact that they are going to lose their good players. I'll tell you that much, going over the conversations with them.
In college basketball, we saw some of the mid-majors rise up because the one and dones were dominating the blue blood schools. And, it gave us Butler in a title game, and we've seen San Diego State and some others. You mentioned the experience factor. What are those top teams in college football this season as it pertains to experience? And does that metric in your mind and that continuity play a bigger role in today's game?
Yeah, I think it does. I think experience and the homegrown atmosphere as well plays a role. You look at a team like Clemson, they have a team atmosphere. Okay. They know that Coach Sweeney is not going to be out trying to bring in a transfer portal player over them and then let them go. They know that if they sign with the team, he's going to be loyal to them, and they're loyal to him. You look at Alabama this year. Last year was Nick Saban, and you had your Saban guys, you had your DeBoer guys. This year, when the transfer portal opened, everybody practically stayed. They're DeBoer guys this year, and I think you'll see them be much better. And on the flip side, let's go to Florida State. Now, Florida State has been a portal-heavy team under Mike Norvell. We know that. So in 22, they had success. They did great. 23, the team is doing well. They did great. What happened last year? Well, they had a portal-heavy team, and all of a sudden they got off to a slow start in the season. And now maybe these one-year signees that are mercenary players coming in, maybe they're like, well, where am I going to go next year? There wasn't that team atmosphere, that team bond to hold them together. Remember, Clemson got blown out in the opener, last year. By Georgia. And then they were able to bond together and get all the way to the playoffs. You didn't see that from the transfer portal heavy team. So I think there is an emphasis on bringing back an experienced squad like Penn State, but also not relying on the transfer portal for, let's say, even 20% of your team.
How do you view Arizona, Cal, and USC? And I asked about those three in particular because each of them, I think, has a head coach who is under a significant amount of pressure to win. Now, different levels of winning for sure, but Brent Brennan, Justin Wilcox, and Lincoln Riley all, I think, are under some pressure this year. How do you view those three teams?
Yeah, and you go with Brent Brennan last year. He stepped into a really tough circumstance in the fact he was taking over the team late. There was a late coaching move. Yep. They lost a lot of players. Jonah Coleman goes and stars for Washington last year because Washington needed players, so they were pulling them out of Arizona. He was taking Arizona recruits up there as well. Arizona got off to a good start last year at 3-1, that big road win over Utah, and then it sort of went away from them. I think they will have a better year this year. There's more balance in the receiving corps. Last year was basically McMillan. You're throwing the ball to McMillan. They knew that. This year there's more balance, and I think that's going to help Fafita. The offensive line looks good, and they're just more of a team this year. Now, they'll probably be an underdog in like 7-8 games this year, maybe even 9. But I do think you're going to see a much better Arizona team on the field for Brent Brennan, and he just stepped into a really tough situation. The Cal situation does concern me a little bit in the fact that they lost a lot post-spring. One thing I'm going to say about Cal is everybody talks about the running back situation, like, oh, they lost their top 7 running backs to the portal. Well, they didn't get much production out of the transfer or out of the running back core last year. I could say that their top 4 running backs this year will probably top the top 4 running backs of last year. So I'm not concerned about that. But the overall losses this is practically a brand new team from last year. They've got, I like the fact that Olavi's back at linebacker, but there's so many transfers. And I think a concern here for me when I wrote the magazine, maybe one of the reasons I picked them a little lower in the ACC, is if they don't have that early season success, then just what you mentioned, John, is Wilcox here? Is he gone? Are we staying? And now all of a sudden you have a lot of question marks when the schedule really heats up in the second half of the year. So that was one of the reasons that I put Cal a little bit lower. They got a new GM and you have to wonder about. And your third team was USC.
Yeah, a lot of focus on Lincoln Riley and his buyout. What do you think about the Trojans this year?
Like I said, I thought they were a much better team than their record last year. It was an amazing thing of how many games they could have won last year. Yeah. I mentioned those, and you look at the Washington game. They're down by 5, and twice they get stopped on downs inside the 10-yard line. One play away from winning that thing. You look at the Minnesota game. They led that thing in the fourth quarter and ended up losing by 7. So there were 5 games, and even the Notre Dame game, how many teams survive giving up 2 99-yard defensive touchdowns in one game? That's like a 2 14-point swings, and they ended up losing by 14. I actually really like the addition of D'Anton Lynn as their defensive coordinator last year. Bringing him in, the defense was better, and this year it could be the best defense Lincoln Riley's put on the field. And we know this guy knows offense. Maeva's back. He's now got the control of the offense. Offensive line, still a little bit of a question. Wasn't happy when Wingfield was not eligible this year, but they've got talent at running back that they're going to have the offense. I think this is an outstanding defense. Eric Gentry could be a stud at linebacker. And when you look at their schedule, I got them a slight underdog at Illinois. I got them an underdog at Oregon and an underdog at Notre Dame. But other than that, I've got a couple toss-up games, home against Michigan, at Nebraska. I think those are toss-up games, and they should be favored in all the rest. So it's going to be a better year for USC. They could be a sneaky Big Ten contender because they were 5 plays away from being 11-0. What if all of a sudden those one-play games went their way? And I do an article on that in the magazine, Close Wins, Close Losses, and it's like a 75%, 80% accurate every single year. So I think USC could be sneaky this year.
Phil, my last question, Colorado, the toll that cancer and the bladder removal for Coach Prime takes, how do you factor that into Colorado's prognosis and the turnover? No Travis Hunter, no Shador. Looks like it could be a really dicey year in Boulder.
Yeah, and it's definitely question marks all the way around for Colorado. And I picked them low in the Big 12. I picked them 12th after last year. They were nearly in the Big 12 title game. Had they not been upset by Kansas, they would have been in there. But I don't like the fact that they have got 31 new transfers and 17 came in post-spring. And to me, when you get transfers after the spring, I sort of get down on that team because you're saying, I'm not happy with the talent I have. We need to go out and find new people. And then how do you get these guys incorporated into a team basis? They have 22 players on this team that were signed as Frosh that are still here. The rest are transfers. And as you mentioned, Sanders' health is a question, but I think he'll overcome that. He can overcome anything. But losing the talent they did with the Heisman winner and Travis Hunter, the quarterback at Shedeur Sanders, losing their top 3 defensive players as well, I think it's going to be a rebuilding year for Colorado this year. But I'll say this. I had Colorado picked towards the bottom of the Big 12 last year, and they surprised me. Of course, everybody in the Big 12. I've had people say, "Did you change your prediction process because of what happened in the Big 12 last year?" I'm like, I've been doing the magazine for 31 years, and there has never been a conference that was that upside down in a single season. And I'm not going to overreact to one because all the other 8 conferences were fine. It was just that conference was super weird last year.
Yep. So, hey, Phil, one more from me. Let's say for fans who are, following it but not super close, they see the AP rankings, they see all the preseason predictions for the CFP. Who are 2 or 3 teams that you think could be, the Indiana or the ASU this year?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see any 3-loss teams get to the playoff like last year. But there are a couple teams that, and my number one surprise team is actually Oklahoma. And well, you guys write about the West Coast teams all the time. You've heard of a quarterback named John Mateer, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
Now, when you look at Oklahoma, there's numerous factors here. First of all, last year they played one of the toughest schedules in the country, and they only had 3 SEC home games last year. Well, this year, because of the neutral site game with Texas, they actually have only 3 true SEC road games. One's at South Carolina, one's at Tennessee, and I think both of those are winnable. So a better schedule for Oklahoma this year, more home games, more big games at home. Now, there was nothing wrong with their defense last year. They held opponents to 87 yards per game below their season average last year. That was number 6 in the country. They have 8 starters back. They have a number 1 rated defensive line. We know their defense is great. What was their problem? It was offense last year. Well, they had 0 returning starters on the offensive line last year. This year, they've got a veteran offensive line and one of the best offensive line coaches in the country in Bill Bedenbaugh. Then I talked about Clemson's receiving core. What about Oklahoma's last year? At one point, they were down their top 5 receivers due to injury. Now you get those guys back. As I mentioned before, you get the players back that had to fill in. You add in some transfers. I think the receiving core goes from a weakness to a strength. Then you look at the quarterback, John Mateer. I think Mateer and their offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle, a nice system. And you got Mateer's running ability and passing ability. He really impressed me last year. And then how about Jade Knott? I thought Jade Knott was one of the best running backs in the country 2 years ago. Now, last year he was all banged up. Far from 100%, sort of a shell of himself. I think he's back to 100%, and they returned their leading rusher in Javonte Barnes. So now I think you got the offense to go with the defense. Last year, of their top 48 players, 24 of them were freshmen last year. So it's a much more veteran team with a better schedule. Still tough schedule, but a better schedule. I actually think Oklahoma has a great shot at making the playoff this year. But one team I'll throw at you that's from the middle of the pack in the Big Ten would be Nebraska. And when I look at Nebraska, it is year 3 for Matt Rule, and everybody knows Matt Rule had 10 wins in his 3rd year. But, they've got Dylan Raiola back at quarterback, and I thought Raiola got off to a good start last year. He had a 9-2 ratio in his first 5 games. But then he sort of looked like a freshman. Remember, he got banged up in the second half of last year and looked like a freshman down the stretch. Had a 4.9 ratio. I think Dylan Raiola could be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten. They've got Emmett Johnson, and Emmett Johnson has to love Dana Holgerson. In the final 4 games last year, he ran for 528 yards. So I think he's going to have a big year this year. The offensive line looks really solid. I like the addition of Dane Key, a wide receiver, and Isaiah Hunter from Cal. Those are 2 really good additions there. My biggest question mark is probably the defensive tackles, losing Hutmaker and Robinson. Those guys were dynamic, but I think they'll come up with a good defense. And you look at the schedule this year, very manageable. They get Michigan at home. I think they can win that. They get USC at home. That's a winnable game. You look at the road games, Maryland, winnable. Minnesota, that's a tough one, but winnable. UCLA, winnable. Penn State, okay, I got them an underdog in that game. This is a team that could basically get to that 10-win total and be a sneaky team to make the playoff, despite coming from a 7-6 record.
So Oklahoma and Nebraska as Cinderellas. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And would that be somebody they met in the playoffs? You get that rivalry going again?
Have Billy Sims and I Am Hippie at the coin toss.
Yeah.
Phil, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I appreciate you.
Phil,
hey, this was a lot of fun, guys. I really enjoyed it. And John, I enjoy talking to you on the Football Writers All-American call every year.
Well, thanks to your research, we're able to get through that thing. It's tough. I am constantly amazed at how well you know how the backup left guard's doing at Toledo. Phil, you provide a service for college football fans. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, a lot of fun, guys. We should do this more often. I enjoy your stuff.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Phil.
Take care.
There he goes. Jon Wilner, quick takeaways. I love it. Cinderella and the glass slipper.
Yes.
Some traditional powers. Loved getting his take on, obviously the legacy Pac-12 schools and how they're going to do. Just the amount of research, how the portal has changed his job. I think fascinating stuff.
And what the coaches tell him privately too about, the kind of for the group of 5, the status that they're resigned to. Interesting. It seemed like the season we had week 0 games, but we're about to get into week 1 games. And we figured good time to take a dive into the weeds of the season. And Phil, there's nobody better to go into the weeds than Phil. His magazine is incredible. He knows more about more teams than anybody else. And I think it's just some great insight that will be relevant for our listeners throughout the season, right? This is great stuff.
And look, the experience factor, that homegrown factor, there's the things that he's thinking about are interesting to me. And then he's bullish on USC, which surprised me. I mean, that might be my biggest takeaway is that he likes USC to be a potential contender in the Big Ten Conference. And the rest of us are kind of looking at USC going, hey, can Lincoln Riley save his job this year? Can he get to 8 or 9? And